to long ball number 2 today. Leagues Cup done and dusted. Seattle Sounders win the Leagues Cup 3-0 in front of a huge crowd at Lumen Park out there in Seattle. A reported 69,000 plus filling it.
Yeah.
And just through the television, the excitement and the atmosphere was palpable for this one.
I mean, I thought, it was funny because I watched that game and then I checked in on the Galaxy in Orlando playing a third place match. Angelinos were not enthusiastic about a third place match in the Leagues Cup. They weren't really out there to watch the Galaxy book their place in the CONCACAF Champions Cup by beating Orlando City, which is a thing. But Seattleites, they were there in numbers. And I saw some pink jerseys, and there were definitely some Messi fans in the building. But that was a night for soccer in Seattle. And it was a great scene before we had some extracurriculars. It was a great scene and a great performance by the Sounders, who are doing this without a number of important players, without Jordan Morris, without Paul Arriola, who's been out for most of the year. Like, this is a team that has figured out how to be one of the best teams in Major League Soccer, despite missing some key pieces. And they took it to Miami. This was not a fluky win. Now, Miami missed some chances. Lionel Messi fluffed his lines and missed a chance that really you would have expected him to put away. But I think it's fair to say the Sounders were the better team on the day, Rob. And while this is a secondary competition, it does, of course, bring them a trophy, which they lifted, get them into the CONCACAF Champions Cup, which they definitely want to be in because they're the Seattle Sounders and they have that history. And we're talking about a competition, though, that a lot of people have cynical feelings about because of the money, because of those things. And I've seen some two sides of the coin on this. Attendance wasn't great throughout the tournament. But per Toodle Ramen on Blue Sky, these games, especially I think the knockout phase games, drew as well as any MLS Cup final draws for television viewers. So you can see why they're doing this. Even if you don't agree with it, you can see why they're doing this. But this was obviously for Seattle an important match, an important opportunity. And again, what I was trying to get to is I think it really does declare the Sounders as, if not MLS Cup favorites right now, because shout out to Philly, shout out to Cincinnati, shout out to Miami, who's still in this, depending on what happens with the extracurricular stuff. But man, Seattle is good. Seattle's very good, and Brian Schmezer is very good.
Yeah, Seattle doing the Seattle thing, starting off slow, looking like underperformers in the first third of the season. And then just Schmezer. I actually want to talk about Schmezer. Like, where does this put him in the pantheon? Because he seems to of a pantheon of American coaches, because part of what was accomplished in that Seattle win is he has won with the Sounders, because those two go hand in hand. He's won every single trophy that has been offered to him.
Yep.
So you were probably more in the mix in this when there was a coach search at the national team level. Does his name ever get bandied about in those conversations, or is he just so inextricably linked to the Seattle Sounders that he wasn't really in the consideration from what you can tell?
I don't think he's ever been seriously considered. I'm not saying he hasn't gotten a phone call or that his representation hasn't gotten a phone call about his interest, gauging his interest. I think if you are looking for a coach, no matter what organization you are running, you kick the tires on a lot of things, including these rumors that keep popping up about Mauricio Pochettino maybe considering a job in England. I think that's just whatever, if Manchester United might be looking for a replacement for Ruben Amorim, they're going to call Pochettino's people and say, hey, would Pochettino be interested? Just so they have a list when they get to that point of, oh, we're firing Ruben. Who are we going to call? Oh, well, that guy said he's not interested. Don't even bother with him, right? That they need to know where to put their efforts, because otherwise you're just wasting your time. So I imagine that Brian Schmezer might have gotten a call at some point, but I don't think it's ever been seriously considered that Brian Schmezer become the head coach of the U.S. men's national team. And I think that's unfortunate. But I don't know that that's how we should gauge this. I do think that for a long time, becoming the U.S. men's national team head coach was the pinnacle of American soccer coaching, right? That was the mountaintop. It shouldn't be that, right? We should be pushing for American coaches to not only succeed in MLS and MLS to grow in prestige, so that being in MLS is not a bad thing, and staying in that job despite maybe interest from the national team is not a bad thing, but also for American coaches to maybe leave American environments and go somewhere else and apply their trade abroad. I don't think Schmezer has any interest in that because he is, as Wade says, a Seattle lifer, right? He played for the Seattle Sounders before they were the Seattle Sounders, right?
That's
He's
wild.
played
Yeah.
indoor soccer in Seattle, if I'm remembering my history correctly. Like, this is a guy who is Seattle through and through. I respect him. I think he's a great coach, but I think he is maybe specific to his environment. Like, I think maybe Brian Schmezer is specific to Seattle, and you do wonder that if you took him out of Seattle, would it be the same? I don't know. Sometimes we can just say, great coach in that situation. Now, the other part of the Brian Schmezer conversation is one I saw Matt Doyle engaged with on Blue Sky yesterday, a whole debate about whether Brian Schmezer should be coach of the year and why he hasn't won a coach of the year already in Major League Soccer.
Never has?
Never has. And
wow.
I think it's I think that like you could sort of like without looking at the individual seasons and comparing the competition, you could be like, well, that doesn't seem right. That's unfair to Brian Schmezer. That means he's disrespected. But if you look at individual seasons, I don't think you can argue he didn't get beaten out by somebody who maybe deserved it as much or more than he did. And of course, these are subjective voting situations. The people who are voting on these awards, there's not like, well, how many points did he get? If he got past this number, he wins no matter what. Like, largely it goes to the coach of the team who achieves the most, but that's not universal. And as you said, Seattle tends to start slow. There are plenty of years where Seattle doesn't get going until midsummer, late summer. Maybe they make a push to the MLS Cup playoffs, but that's not guaranteed. They have a couple of trophies, a couple of MLS Cup trophies under Schmezer. You could take out individual moments from those runs and ask questions about Schmetzer's leadership and all those things. What I'm saying is I respect the man immensely, but I don't know that means we need to elevate him to something like MLS coaching Mount Rushmore or the U.S. men's national team job.
I took us down a bit of a tangent talking Schmezer and his ceiling, but the original note you were talking about was, is this making Seattle an MLS Cup favorite with them rounding into this good of form? And if they did go on to have a great postseason run and get to the MLS Cup final, this might actually become one of it definitely would be a cliche breaker. They had a deep, deep run at the beginning. Remember back in early spring when they went deep in the CONCACAF Champions Cup? They did well there. They went into and had a respectable performance in the Club World Cup. And then if they're able to get themselves and then they obviously won Leagues Cup, getting a positive run and maybe even making the MLS Cup final, is that one of the busiest / most expectation breaking seasons?
I mean, I was high on the Sounders when the season began, but I also was considering Morris and Areola probably contributing for most of the year, and that's obviously been part of the deal. Rusnak missed a bunch of time. You just didn't know how they were going to fill those gaps. The fact that Osaze De Rosario is a major contributor now, that Paul Rothrock has stepped in to a significant role for this team, those things you can't really predict, and they're a credit to Schmezer and the coaching staff there in Seattle for getting those guys coached up to that level. Yeah, considering the things they've had to play for, like the number of competitions that they've been in and all the things that have been going on. Yeah, I mean, when all is said and done, if they are MLS Cup champions, we may look back and say, well, that was maybe the not the greatest MLS season of all time, because that's judged differently perhaps, but it will be one of the greatest sort of holistic American soccer seasons we've ever seen if they win a couple of different trophies and have navigated this path through these various competitions.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what their match total for the year of 2025 will be by that time it's all done, with so many deep runs and extra competitions for them. But to round it out, Seattle Sounders, Leagues Cup champions, 3-0 win over Inter Miami. We'll talk a little bit later in the show about the post-game festivities that went down there in Seattle. Plenty to mull over there.